There isn't a dimension of our lives, of our government, of our country, of our foreign policy that has not been impacted by 9/11.
It was more an attack on American capitalism.
We knew that this was one of those fulcrum moments, economically, politically, psychologically.
If you think of 700 funerals, at the time we didn't know exactly how many people had died, but 700 funerals, that's 10 funerals for 70 days in a row.
She said, "Mother, I feel like Alice in Wonderland. I've gone through the looking glass and nothing will be the same again."
The September 11th attacks in the United States fundamentally changed this country and the world. 10 years ago, I stood not very far from this spot at Ground Zero and watched with millions of other New Yorkers and people around the world as the first tower fell. Later that morning, as I headed back to the FT's Midtown offices in Manhattan, up the West Side Highway, no one knew who was behind the attack or what lay before us. But we did know that the world had fundamentally changed.
I was coming back from a meeting in Zurich, and I was over the North Atlantic when my senior security person came up to me and said, "The captain wants to see you."
My office at 120 Broadway was a block and a half from the towers, and I was sitting at my desk on the 25th floor, heard this enormous explosion.
And I went downtown and I got to the building and I was standing at the door of my building when the other tower collapsed. And I started running and I just happened to run to the right. If I had run to my left, I would have run into the tower collapsing and probably also wouldn't be here. But I ran to the right and ran from that giant black tornado cloud, and then I drove under a car as the black sort of overcame me, and I was sure I was going to die.
Then the press was announcing that the Pentagon had been struck, and they said that a helicopter had crashed at the Pentagon. I looked out my window. I could see the flames from the Pentagon, and I knew it was not a helicopter. It was a terrorist attack.
Political leaders began to grasp the scope of the rapidly changing developments, but confusion reigned. As security officials scrambled to deal with the crisis, the president and the congressional leadership were taken to separate, undisclosed locations for protection.
I never have been quite sure where we were. We were getting incoming information about, then there was another plane in the air. And I raised the question to the security people who were there that somebody ordered that plane to be shot down. And there was silence, because I don't know whether they were wondering if that had been done, or they shocked that I would suggest such a thing. But shortly there, of course, after the plane went into the ground.
United 93, United 903, do you hear Cleveland? United 93, understand you have a bomb on board, go ahead.
Hey, we're making a turn at 956, he appears to be heading right towards us.
United 93, Cleveland, do you still hear the center?
They put me on a KC-10, which is a refueling large aircraft, and I was the only passenger. And as we arrived in U.S. airspace, two F-16s got on both sides of the wing to escort me in over the World Trade Center. I just saw smoking ruins, and I couldn't see the towers.
On the evening of September 11th, we didn't know who had survived and who hadn't survived. So we put out just in the media that if you worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, to please call this number. I mean, we had no HR department. Everyone had been killed. We didn't know who was alive and who wasn't.
That first day, I probably issued not just dozens, perhaps 100 emergency orders, executive orders.
About 3,000 lives were lost in the attacks against America, including more than 340 emergency responders. The attacks by al-Qaeda were not only seen as an assault on the American way of life, but an attempt to bring down the U.S. financial system. The stock markets were closed for 6 days before they reopened.
We were terrified that when the markets opened, that the markets would crash.
Amid all of the uncertainty, equity markets tumbled in the first full week of trading, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average closing down 14%.
We had an economic crisis. We had all this concentration of global financial might in not just one city, but in a small area of that city.
Alan Greenspan, who was chairman of the Federal Reserve at the time, says the Fed relied on Cold War-era contingency plans for a nuclear attack. He says he expected another attack to hit the U.S. within 30 days. It was the worst forecast he says he ever made.
It was more an attack on American capitalism. And the key center of American capitalism is basically Wall Street, and literally trying to destroy Wall Street. They couldn't do that no matter what they did.
And so we had a phone call that evening of the 11th. What I said on the phone was, we can shut the firm and go to our friends' funerals, or we'll work harder than we've ever worked before to try to save this company. But I have to tell you, there's only one reason that I'm interested in saving this company, and that's to help our friends' families. And so I don't want to work. I'm not interested in going to work. But if we're going to go to work, the only way we're going to do it is to help our friends' families. So those are the two choices. What do you think?
There was a sense of purpose. I mean, there was this incredible coming together. And I was down at the Trade Center, one of the many who heard George Bush in what perhaps was his finest moment, speak into the megaphone and speak to the world.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
When he did that, he captured not only his own passion and strength, but the nation's.
There was an incredible sense of unity and responsibility to unity that is certainly unique in my lifetime.
As we went forward, we passed a series of pieces of legislation, some of it very large in nature, like the Patriot Act. We created the Department of Homeland Security. We reformed intelligence. It was the most genuine sense of unity that I ever experienced as a member of Congress, and I served for 35 years.
The terror attacks changed the course of U.S. foreign policy and drove the nation into two wars. President Bush declared a national war on terror.
Prior to 9/11, there was still a tendency to think of security as more or less neatly divided between war fighting overseas and domestic law enforcement. And what 9/11 exposed is that division does not really reflect reality.
More than 6,000 American soldiers have been killed in the ongoing wars, and tens of thousands more have been injured. The conflicts have cost at least $1.4 trillion, contributing to skyrocketing U.S. debt. The wars and Bush administration national security policies challenged America's reputation abroad.
You know, the Department of Homeland Security was formed in 2003. It was a consequence of the 9/11 attacks. The budget of DHS was about $50 billion a year. Unquestionably, it's been probably hundreds of billions of dollars.
It shifted our focus on terrorism. And as a result of that, essentially infrastructure and all the other dimensions of governance and of nations and of economies was kind of an afterthought.
There came a point where we should have been more focused on our domestic priorities of controlling government spending, encouraging the private sector to create opportunity.
We're fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan when I think many people would say we are losing the economic battles to China, Brazil, Vietnam, India.
By the end of the Bush years, the country had grown tired of war and was facing a financial crisis on a scale that had not been seen since the Great Depression, caused by speculation on Wall Street and the collapse of the housing market. In 2008, American voters appeared to reject the policies that had dominated the country since the 9/11 attacks and elected a young senator named Barack Obama, who won the White House on a promise to unify the country.
Congratulations, Mr. President. All the best wishes.
Today, I say to you that the challenges we face are real. They are serious and they are many. They will not be met easily or in a short span of time. But know this, America, they will be met.
But in the face of the Great Recession, staggering unemployment, a federal bailout of Wall Street, and the passage of a health care law that was deeply unpopular among many Americans, the mood of much of the country became angry. The new Tea Party movement expressed the frustrations of millions of Americans who felt dispossessed by what they saw as the destruction of the American dream, not at the hands of foreign terrorists, but by a tyrannical federal government.
One of the sad things about now, almost 10 years later, is we've lost that sense of unity.
That we are living at a moment when our politics appears to be divisive, to say the least. I think that the root cause of that is economic distress.
When you think about the fact that, 1 out of every 5 men who wake up in the morning do not have a job to go to, I mean, that has an enormous impact on the whole morale of this country.
After years of fruitless searches for the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, the day was brought back into focus on May 1st, 2011, when President Barack Obama announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed in Pakistan by an elite troop of U.S. forces. The celebratory atmosphere did not last long. Nearly 10 years after the attacks, the U.S. political system is all but broken. In August, the political divide between Republicans and President Obama nearly forced the U.S. to default on its debts. Washington has never seemed more dysfunctional.
Even downgrading of the country doesn't create a singular event the way the kind of human loss that occurred on 9/11, because it's slower moving and because economics fires up ideological debate much more. This has ended up being much more fractious.
I think there's an angst about things. I talk to some people from my home state today, and they just basically say, it's kind of like Bring on the Clowns. This is not funny anymore.
Today, in the spot that caught the world's attention 10 years ago, buildings are beginning to rise at ground zero, reshaping the skyline of one of America's greatest cities.
The events of September 11th don't explain everything about where the country finds itself today. But the terrorist attacks were a defining moment in American history that changed the long-term trajectory of the nation's foreign and domestic policy. Perhaps more than anything, it shook the confidence of the country to its core, and we're still living through the consequences.
Well, we've had a memorial every year on September 11th because it's the most important place for me. We read their names, we show their pictures, we talk together, we celebrate being together in their lives, and we have a great bond. And it's the only place I want to be, and it is how I make it through the day.
I think there is a before and an after, and we still don't know quite what we will look like in the after, and we're struggling to put things together economically and politically vis-a-vis the rest of the world, but it is a before and an after moment.
And we have to step back a bit from the anger and the finger pointing and try to solve problems, and to do that we have to see what we have in common as opposed to what divides us.
This is a threat to our political system, but there is no evidence that the rule of law or the Constitution is in jeopardy or anything like that. Nobody who wants to change the system in any particular way. And how it's going to come out, I wish I could forecast. I can't.
We are seeing a new world order being built right now. And it's very difficult for America to come to grips with this. 9/11 knocked us off balance. We're still not back to where we were. Winston Churchill used the term once, the jarring gong of reality. This was America's jarring gong of reality like few we've ever had.